Well, this is a lot of fun, but it is time to get started. So I'm going to call to order the oldest Lions Club in the world. And if you stand, if you can, and JP is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and pledge to the Texas flag. Remember to mute yourself so that we don't hear everybody saying the pledge at one time.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Texas flag, honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Yeehaw!
Thank you very, very much. Do we have any guests today? Anybody have brought any guests today? Sam, were you going to say something? No. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right then. No guests today. We have one birthday. Glenda Summers' birthday is the 21st. So let's be sure to wish her a really happy birthday. She's a lovely person. So she needs to get a lot of birthday wishes.
Do we know where
do we send the
is?
checks?
I know. Happy 21st to Glenda. I wonder who's going to buy her first drink. So,
Okay, shall we move on? Okay, under announcements, I'm going to do an update on casino night. Right now, Patty is meeting with Deborah at the center, doing some last minute organization of casino night. And but I want to remind you to that if you need some more forms, if you need to buy more tickets, that you can go onto the website, austindowntownlines.org, and there's lots of forms on there, not only for the casino night, but for the Rose Day also. Yes, ma'am.
Do we know how many tickets have been sold yet?
Patty probably knows.
I just sent it to Patty, and I don't have a real number for you, ma'am, but I think it was around 20 or 30, I think, something like that. I may be wrong about that.
20 or 30 tickets?
Yes, individuals, yes.
And how many?
Take a look at that again.
Now that doesn't seem right, because a lot of people bought tables for 8.
Yeah, I was counting those as individuals. I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Otherwise, we'd be having to go out on the street looking for people. Yes. Okay. And we're meeting every Friday night. Well, we'll be meeting this Friday night to discuss things again. We have a Zoom meeting every Friday night where we're ironing out all the things that we need to for casino night. But right now, it looks like things are running well. Ann told us about a service opportunity that we have, and we have been invited to do the refreshments for the Texas Lions Camp on June the 10th, and we'll be talking about more than that a little bit later, but put it on your agenda, June 10th. And do you want to add anything about that right now, or you're muted?
The only thing I would say, we've done this before in the summer. It's typically, we've gone over on a Sunday. This is on a Friday, and we'll be greeting the families and the children who are coming for the weekend stay. And we'll be serving them refreshments, sodas and snacks. And it'll be a chance for us to interact with the campers and their families, and for everyone who goes to get to see the camp and see the construction. It's really exciting. So please put it on your calendar, and I hope you can go. And I'll have to get back to you what time we have to be there. I'm not sure. I don't know that.
By the way. Well, it said 1:15, arrive at 1:15, and we were gonna
Okay.
serve it too, yeah.
Okay,
But
that's it.
this would be a wonderful chance for you to invite somebody to come and see what all the wonderful things Lions Club is doing, you know, so that might make them interested in joining us. Thank you, Anne.
Mhm,
Now,
thank you.
Steve, would you give us a brief update on service hours and how the reporting is going?
Sure thing. Thank you, Glenda. So folks have been getting in some of their service reports to me, so I'm really grateful for that. I appreciate it. Mac, I did receive your email. So I guess a quick request is if anybody's heading up a committee and they can kind of bundle all those hours from the committee. Patty Robinson's already done that. Mac has done that. And what I was sharing with Glenda is I'm going to send the Word document out to everybody that'll have just all the questions in case you want to report individual service. You can reply back to me in an email just answering those questions, or if you'd like to print it and fill it out. I apologize for delays and also for that not having a better interface, but I've been in touch with a couple of the folks from the district who are trying to get me a better form we can use, but we'll bring them all in and we'll post them ASAP. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, then I think the next thing is our rose auction.
Yeah, Glenda.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, could I make one more announcement, please?
Yes, you may.
Yes, I just want to remind all those past presidents that are serving on the nominations committee that our nominations committee will be meeting next Monday, February 21st at 6:30 in the evening via Zoom. And everyone will be receiving a link on how to join the meeting. But that is an important meeting. It is to consider filling the positions for the board of directors for 2022, 2023. So hope everybody can make it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Okay, then I think we're ready for our rose auction. JP, are you ready to auction off a dozen roses that Robert is going to show us?
I see them right there, Robert. Thank you. We're supposed to be trying to encourage people to sell. So want to encourage you to bid up and then go out and sell roses. So where do I hear $25? Who give me 25? Raise your hand, scratch your nose, pick your ear. There's 25. Anybody give me 50? I need 50. John gave me 25. There's 50 from Jim. Anybody 75? 75, looking for 75. Anybody 75? Anywhere? 75, is that a bid, Robert?
No, I don't think so.
Looking for 75. Got 50 from Jim Robertson. 75, 75. Anybody 75? Anybody 60? No 60? There's 60, ma'am, 60. Jim, 75? 75, Jim. I got 75, ma'am. I got 75 from Jim. Back to you. Back to you once. Back to you. Going to give them to Jim. You don't want to let him get them this cheap, do you? 75, Jim, you got them. Work out with Robert how they get delivered. Okay.
Does anybody, thank you, JP, and thank you for Robert. Appreciate all of that. Does anybody else have any announcements to make before we move into our program? Okay. Mac is going to introduce our speaker and our program, but first I want to apologize to Judge Wisser for misspelling your name on the agenda, and I hope I don't get into any kind of serious problems with the judge.
Don't worry a bit.
He wore a tie today, so he's immune.
You don't want to have to go before that judge.
No, I understand he has a pretty strict record there. So yeah, that's why I'm apologizing now. Okay, Mac, if you will introduce our program for us.
He doesn't need an introduction. You all know our own Lion Judge, Jon Wisser. You can read a brief description of his many accomplishments in the announcement. including his military service and many contributions to the Travis County criminal justice systems. But you should also know him as a member of our own club here since 1978. He's a witty, entertaining, knowledgeable speaker on a variety of topics. And his topic today is about the DWI laws and how they have evolved over the years, informed by his many years on the bench. So please welcome our own Judge Jon Wisser.
Well, thank you. Well, Mac just called me a few days ago and said they were really desperate for a program, and I knew for them to be calling me, they had to be very desperate. So I really haven't had a great amount of time to develop this since I've been stuck in the courtroom almost every day for the last several weeks. But so any questions or comments or observations would be more than welcome. But I was seated in court actually yesterday afternoon handling a driving while intoxicated docket. And I stopped, we were doing it remotely, and I had a lot of lawyers and defendants on my monitors. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that 50 years ago, I was in the same courtroom that I was seated in yesterday, doing pretty much the same thing. That was kind of a depressing thought, that in 50 years, here I was doing the same thing in the same location. I don't know if that's a lack of ambition, motivation, a lack of talent or skill, but how many people stay in one job nowadays for 50 years? I know my children seem to change employment every 2 or 3 years. But anyway, so I was sitting there and I was thinking, 50 years, how much things have changed. And I don't know that a lot of people are aware of the changes that have occurred at your county courthouse, because we no longer have newspaper coverage. When I showed up there in 1972, the Austin American Statesman had a reporter dedicated to the courthouse full time. He was there looking over your shoulder, reporting on what you were doing. There was one for the criminal courts, one for the civil courts, one for the federal courts, one for the municipal courts, one for city council. But now we have none of that. There is no one looking over your shoulder. Periodically, a TV reporter, who's usually a very young, attractive person who knows absolutely nothing about the criminal justice system or Austin or history, will show up and ask you a few questions. But I think as a result, I think the general population, probably this group accepted, knows very little about what goes on at your county courthouse. I don't know how many of you have already voted. But when you go down there and you look at your ballot, I think you're going to find most of the races are now judicial races. But how many of you really know anything about those people who are running for these courts? What they believe, what their policies are, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. I, now been a judge, doing this for 50 years. But if you ask me, who are the 9 judges on the Texas Supreme Court, I'd be lucky if I could name more than 2. If you ask me who the 9 judges are on the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is our Supreme Court for criminal matters, I might be able to get 2 out of 9. But how many of you could name more than 3 or 4 of the 18 of the top judges? I suspect there's no one there. That's not unreasonable. I wonder about a system in Harris County. When you go down there to vote, there may be in excess of 50 judicial positions on that ballot. How many people know anything at all about who they're voting for? So more or less, in the general election, you vote either Democrat or Republican, but in the primaries, you don't know any, and it's impossible for you to know anything. So I think as an end result, we get some very unique individuals serving as judges. Some are very qualified, some are considerably less qualified, and occasionally very qualified judges get thrown out and unqualified ones take their place, and vice versa. So I think as the state has expanded in some manner, it's really affected the quality of the judiciary. When I showed up in your county courthouse, there were 2 county courts. County courts handle misdemeanors and smaller cases. There were 2 of those. There were 5 district courts. District courts handle all the serious things, the big money cases, the felony cases, things like that. So there were 2 and 5. Today, there are, I believe, 7 county, there are a total of 37 judges now. So even the judges don't know who all the other judges are. There's so many of us. And then there's no media coverage. So I think the public really has very little idea about what's going on at the courthouse. And that's probably good, because I think if the public had a better idea of what we were doing there, they'd be even more concerned about the dysfunction in our country. But I was going to predominantly, a few other things I noticed when I became a judge, and I just mentioned there were 2 county and 5 districts, 7 courts. They were all presided over by 7 Anglo males. Today, and this may be a positive, I'm not sure, we now have a total of, at the district level, 3 men and 18 women. At the end of the next election, there will be not 1 Anglo male county or district judge. So that's, I find, fairly shocking. In a relatively small span of about 4 decades, we went from 100% Anglo males to 0% Anglo males. I know you hear a lot of discussion and concern about that we don't have enough diversity. Believe me, in Travis County, we have a lot of diversity. In fact, you'd say the only underrepresented segment of the population were the Anglo males, because it's become impossible for an Anglo male to get elected. We've had several incumbent Anglo male judges who recently have been defeated by females. I think that's the general view of most of us who are in the system, that a female running against a male in the Democratic primary has a 6 or 7% advantage, everything taken into consideration. So as a result, if you look over your ballot when you vote, there is not 1 Anglo male running for office. We've more or less given up. And again, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing or a good thing. I think it's just a very interesting thing, because I think the media tends to emphasize a lack of diversity. I know we have an opening in the Supreme Court of the United States, and the president's nominated a Black woman. There's a lot of discussion how we've never had a Black woman and how this is a good thing, and that may well be. But in Travis County, we do not have a lack of diversity. We have quite a few Black judges, quite a few Hispanic judges, quite a few Asian judges, and quite a few Anglo females. But anyway, I find that interesting. You all may not find it interesting, but I thought that that was interesting. So when I stepped into this courtroom I was in yesterday, about 50 years ago, there was a guy named Ned Granger, who's the county attorney. And the county attorney office handles most of the driving while intoxicated cases. You have, the first time you get caught, the county attorney handles your case. Generally the second time, the third time. About the 4th or 5th time you get a DWI, it gets a little more serious. It becomes a felony and you end up in the district courts, and the district attorney handles your case. But overwhelmingly, driving while intoxicated cases are handled by the county attorney's office, and they're in the county courts of law. So when I showed up on the very first few days, I was given a stack of DWI cases, and I was told, go down to the courtroom and take care of these cases. And I said, what am I supposed to do? In law school, they don't really teach you how to do little things like this. They the University of Texas Law School taught me how to go to the Supreme Court of the United States and argue. But if they considered it somewhat beneath them to teach you how to go down to a county court or a district court or justice of the peace court, University of Texas Law School graduates were cut out for better things. We were going to run the state and the country. We weren't going to be at the county level. But regardless, so my boss said, well, if they plead guilty, you know, they get 3 days in jail or $50 fine, we may put them on probation, or they can plead not guilty and have a trial. Those are the two choices. And that's the way it was for a long time. The average sentence was, you know, 3 days in jail, $50 fine, and you went out the door. And it was sort of not particularly quick, but relatively painless. That was the first DWI. Your second, actually your first DWI, you normally got probation. Your second DWI, you got the 3 days in jail. Your third DWI, you got 10 days. So you could get up to 3 DWIs without encountering any serious problems. But then we had the advent of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And they showed up in force at the courthouse. And by this time, I was a county court of law judge handling DWI cases. And they would fill up half the courtroom and they'd sit there and they would stare at me and watch what I did. And if I were to say 3 days, they would all frown. And if I said a year in jail, then they'd smile. But they exerted considerable pressure on the judiciary to be tougher on DWI cases. And not surprisingly, the judges got considerably tougher. The prosecutors got tougher. They went to the legislature, and the legislature enacted tougher laws. And that trend continued for a while. But then the mothers from drunk driving, I don't know if they got tired or they thought their job was done. They quit coming to the courthouse. There was not much media coverage. And the legislature was influenced by other groups. Counterbalancing the Mothers Against Drunk Driver, you had the obvious strong liquor lobby, the restaurant, the bars, and all those people. And the last thing they wanted were a lot of tough DWI laws. And without the Mothers Against Drunk Driving to counter them, they gradually got the legislature to amend the laws and change the laws. And it's of interest, at least I found it interesting, how the laws have evolved. Sometimes they got tougher, sometimes they got weaker. They used to be I don't know, a few years ago, they decided we're going to get serious. We're going to fine you. Not only are you going to have a criminal DWI case, but you're going to get a fine of $2,000, $3,000, or $5,000 that you're going to have to pay the state. And if you don't pay it, we're going to take away your driver's license. And this occurred about 8 years ago. Well, unfortunately, most people who get DWIs cannot afford to pay that money. So as a result, thousands and thousands of driver's licenses were suspended. And I very quickly learned that taking away a person's driver's license does not mean they stop driving. They just continue to drive and they don't have a license. And the end result was thousands and thousands of people were being arrested for driving without a license in the state. And they flooded and overwhelmed the court system. So the court system went to the legislature and begged and pleaded, please change this law. We cannot handle this volume. So they did away with all that. I think they thought by charging all this money, this was going to be a good thing. We can lower everyone's taxes because all the drunk drivers are going to pay. But most of the drunk drivers didn't have any money, didn't pay, lost their license. And all it did was foul up the court system. But that was an interesting experiment. But then we have a sort of, our prison system grew really large here in Texas, and it got very expensive, and people started worrying about how much we were paying for prisons and in the jails. So there was a big movement to reduce these populations, and they had an effect on the DWI laws. at the peak of our prison population of about 152,000, approximately 15% of those 152,000 people, I mean, upwards of 20,000 were in there for driving while intoxicated. And there was a decision, well, we should only put violent criminals in prison. DWI people, and their way of looking at it, were not violent, so let's not be sending them to prison in these numbers. So they've changed the law to do away with that. And there's been a massive movement against incarceration around the country, but really it's been very pronounced here in Travis County. When I allegedly retired in 2000, a little before 2006, we were approaching 3,000 people in the Travis County Jail. And today we have half that number in the jail. And we just hardly put anyone in jail anymore. And we used to have quite a few people in jail for DWIs, but now almost everyone is released on their promise to come back to court. That's a personal bond. Back in the day, if you had a DWI case and you were out on bond, and you got a second one, you were in jail until you took care of your cases. Now, you're no longer in jail. You may have one DWI case that's in the court system. You get a second DWI in the court system, you're out again. I've seen some people who have 3 pending driving while intoxicated cases who are out on the street driving around. But the jail population is down, and that's saving tax money. And I guess that's a good thing. But whether it's a good thing having so many people driving around who have so many pending cases, I do not think that's a good thing. One of the major issues that I've whined and complained about and campaigned against from day one, from 1972, was how long it takes for us to dispose of cases. Every bit of research, and I was a criminologist, sociologist, psychologist, was that a light punishment administered soon after an offense is a much more effective deterrent than a harsher punishment administered remotely from the offense. There's been a lot of research in this. In the final, the American Bar Association, the National Association of Courts, says that you should have about 100% of DWI cases should be concluded within 90 days. The last time I looked in Travis County, the median time for disposition was 240 days. Almost 3 times what the experts recommend. And I still go to the courthouse daily and try DWI cases, some of which are 2 and 3 years old. And I sit there and I wonder, what good are we doing trying this DWI case 3 years after the person was arrested? And if he's found guilty, punishing him. I mean, the analogy I use is like your dog. You get a new dog and it's not yet housebroken. Your dog relieves itself on your living room floor. You don't wait 2 or 3 weeks and then pick up a newspaper and start pounding your dog and yelling, no, 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 because you can't connect the two. But that's in effect what we are doing here. And it's not just the DWI cases. We are routinely trying cases that are 2 and 3 years old. And, you know, we can say, well, we need more courts, we need more judges. Now, that may be true, but we have a tradition. And it's been my observation and discovery that no matter what laws are passed and procedures, tradition is what counts. And we have had a tradition in Travis County of letting cases linger and take a long time. Now, back in 1972, when I complained to my boss, I said, this isn't how we should run a system. The explanation I was given is, well, we're mostly dealing with poor people who are being arrested and taken into the criminal justice system. Poor people need to hire lawyers. They don't have a bank account which has a lot of money to pay a lawyer. They need time to pay lawyers. And with what the average lawyer was charging back then and the average income, it takes at least a year or a year and a half for them to get enough money to pay the lawyer. And lawyers know, never dispose of a case until you've been fully paid, because once the case is taken care of, these people aren't going to pay you later. They may thank you, but you're not going to get paid. So the lawyers have a huge incentive to prolong their cases until they're paid for. And that was the explanation I was given. And as things evolve, the criminal defendants have gotten poorer and poorer. We have more and more indigency. At the misdemeanor level, probably 70% of the people arrested are indigent, cannot afford to hire their own lawyer, need us to give them a lawyer that your tax dollars will pay for. At the felony level, that's probably approaching 90% of the defendants now get court-appointed, paid for lawyers. So you would think that since the government is now paying these lawyers, all these cases would move really quick, because the lawyers being paid by the government don't get paid until the case is disposed of. But for some reason, it has not made an appreciable difference. I think maybe the judges are so used to the old system. But there is no, time is not of the essence. There's no sense of urgency. I've seen cases that have showed up in court 30 different times, reset, 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 year after year goes by. And you start wondering, what are we doing here? What are we accomplishing? Are we protecting the public? But that's the system we have. That'd be a good question if you ever went to a candidate forum for judicial candidates, to ask them, when do you think cases should be disposed of? What are you going to do to more expeditiously handle these cases? And I tried a lot of things with little success. It was the problem was I would try to push cases really quick, and that would make me unpopular politically with the lawyers. The other judges were smarter than me, and they wouldn't do it. And no politician wants to be standing out there by himself. If everyone is doing this, you don't want to be doing that. So there was considerable political pressure from the lawyers not to be pushing to dispose of cases before they got paid. So, you know, I will concede that I eventually quit campaigning and pushing as hard as I could. I guess I was more interested in retaining my employment than I was in doing what was right. But interesting, back to the DWIs, what the current system is. It used to be you got a conviction, you were put on probation, or you went to jail. Both of those had an impact. You then had a record, and your insurance company got that record, and your insurance premiums went way up. And so the system evolved ways of keeping that off the record. First, they went to something, instead of a standard probation, they used something called deferred adjudication, where you weren't found guilty. And in probation, as that term is used, the current term is community supervision, you plead guilty, the judge says, I find you guilty, I sentence you to a year in jail, but rather than go to jail for a year, I'll put you on probation for 2 years. Here's 3 pages of rules. If you follow these, at the end, you're let go. But you have a record of you have been convicted of DWI. So then they came up with deferred adjudication. The defendant says, I plead guilty. The judge says, well, I believe based on your plea of guilty, you are guilty, but I am not going to find you guilty. Instead, I'll put you on probation. At the end of probation, I will dismiss the case, so you no longer have a conviction. If you're asked, have you ever been convicted of DWI? You can say, no, I've never been convicted. So that was a good thing. But the legislature, this was when the Mothers of Drunk Driving were active, they went down there and they said, this is outrageous. The judges And the prosecutors are getting around people being convicted. So the legislature said, no more deferred adjudication. So you'd think, well, that solves the problem. No, what then happened, you would be charged with driving while intoxicated. And they'd say, well, we're going to reduce that to reckless driving, or the major one in Travis County was obstruction of a highway. So you plead guilty and we'll put you on probation. But if they ever ask you, have you been convicted of DWI? You can say, no, I've never been convicted of DWI. You've now been convicted of obstruction of a highway, which is like a traffic offense, and the insurance companies aren't going to triple or quadruple your premiums. So that's what happened in Travis County. I noticed almost a huge number of DWIs are all being reduced to obstruction of highway charges. And I have the data on it. It's pretty shocking. More than half of the DWI cases were reduced down. But then the legislature again went back to deferred adjudication. They changed it where you could get that deferred adjudication and stop the conviction. But then they started saying, well, that is too harsh. The prosecutors and the judges said, well, from now on, when you get a DWI, here's a new deal. You come in, you plead guilty, and we're going to send you to this program. And if you complete the program, we'll dismiss the case. So it's called a diversion program. So you got arrested for DWI. The county attorney filed a document charging you with the offense. You pled guilty. Then the judge let you free to follow some rules for 6 months or so. And if you did that, the case got dismissed. So again, you had no conviction. Well, what they have now evolved to what I was doing yesterday, now the police officer arrests you, charges you for DWI. The case goes to the county attorney's office, and they say, we're sending you to the diversion court. And they sent you to the court I was running yesterday, where I give you a set of rules to follow. And if you follow these rules for 6 months, the case is never even filed. The county attorney's office tells the police, we're not filing that case. So you don't even have that on your record. So here's another way. So all of these things are very good. I think if you're arrested for DWI, you should avail yourself of these programs for sure. Now, whether they're good for the public and our safety, I really don't know about that. I think it's a big experiment, but I suspect not. But there's another issue that I was going to speak of, and I don't want to take too much time. This was the intoxilizer program, sometimes referred to as the breath test program. Now, all of you have agreed that if you are stopped by a police officer and he suspects that you're DWI, you have agreed that you will take a breath test. Are all of you aware of that? When you get your driver's license, you are consenting to take a breath test if you are stopped and you're requested to take one. What percent of people in Travis County who are stopped for DWI, and the officer says, I request that you take a breath test, blow into the intoxilizer machine, what percent of the people refuse? Anyone have a guess? No one?
I'll say 90.
10%.
85.
30.
27%.
70%. We're better than Florida. In Florida, 82% refuse. And you say, well, see, if you take that intoxilizer test, then the state has good evidence. It makes it much easier to try the case. Instead of some officer saying, I talked to him and he had blurred speech, bloody eyes, swayed. You have a number there. So it makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker. So you have given consent that you will do it and you refuse. And the consequence is you are read by the officer who stops you. He reads you from think it's called a DIC 24 form. It's a form put out by the Republic. It says, you are hereby requested to submit a breath test. In the event you fail to do so, your driver's license may be suspended for 180 days up to 2 years. And 70% of the people say no. So you think, well, that would be a pretty good incentive. But a lot of these people have been told, either their friends or lawyers, or they have a prior DWI. Upwards of 40% of the people arrested for DWI have already had another DWI, so they have the experience. And every criminal defense lawyer will tell you, do not take that breath test. Do not blow into that machine. And the word is out on the streets. I mean, especially if you're a person who drinks a lot, do not blow into that breath machine. So they don't do it. So then you'd say, well, I guess they've got a lot of people walking and taking the buses. Why are the buses so empty with all these people who refuse? And we have quite a few DWIs here. I have a number here in Austin. Let's see, the last year before the pandemic, we had 6,000 DWI cases. You'd think 6,000, 70% refused to blow, that's 4,200. That'd be 4,200 people who are riding the bus. Have you noticed that the buses are filled with all these people? Or that they're on bicycles? No, they're not. So what happens, the DPS sends in the thing to a department and they set it for a review. It has to go in front of a judge for a review. It's called a ALR, Administrative Law Review, where the DPS submits an affidavit saying, we stopped this person and we thought they were intoxicated for this reason. We asked them to take the breath test. They didn't do it. And in the ALR hearings, the DPS almost always wins. 95% of the time, the judge says, well, the officer had good reason to think you were intoxicated. You refused. Your license is suspended. In 12 days, it's suspended. Well, one of two things happens. One, most often you just keep driving and hope you won't get caught. A lot of them get caught. We have huge numbers of driving with license suspended cases, thousands of those cases. But what do you do? If you're a more conscientious person, you go to your lawyer, or your lawyer's already told you, come visit me and we're going to get an occupational driver's license. You file with the court, and I think I went through 20 or 30 of these yesterday. You file a thing that says, my employment, or I have children I need to take to school, or I have elderly parents I need to take care of, necessitate that I have the ability to drive. So I need an occupational driver's license for the period of time when my regular license is suspended. And as the ones I'm looking at, most of them say, I want an occupational license that permits me to drive day and night anywhere in the state. And unfortunately, a lot of judges sign those. Now, I'm viewed as old school. So if I sign one, I always write, you must have a breath intoxicator device installed on your vehicle before I will let you have this license. And I try to restrict their hours to not driving around at midnight or 2 or 3. But unfortunately, not all the judges worry about it. So we give out, like I said, I went through approximately 50 of these things yesterday. So there are hundreds of occupational license. So refusing to take the breath test, which helps your chance of not getting convicted, which increases our cost, does not result in much of a penalty if you can get the occupational driver's license for a couple of $100. So what are my solutions to all these problems? Well, I don't know. I fought in several wars. I went to Vietnam and fought in that war, lost that war. I've been fighting the drug war for 40 years, haven't won that war. This is probably one more defeat on my record of losing wars, is the wars against DWIs in the court system. I think, and I've reviewed the laws in other countries that have had more success than we have. I think the general example of the Scandinavian countries. First off, our level, the driving while intoxicated law says you commit an offense if you operate a motor vehicle in a public place while you do not possess normal use of mental or physical faculties, or you have a blood alcohol reading of above 0.08%. That is very, very high. Most countries are down, the Scandinavian countries are about 0.02, and some are at about 0.05. There are a handful, I think maybe Italy is 0.08, but most of these civilized countries are much lower. 0.02, if you have about one drink an hour, you know, you're probably a little under 0.02. One good stiff shot of alcohol or one beer in an hour, you're not going to have hardly any reading at all. If you have two in an hour, you might have a 0.02. Now to get up to 0.08, you're generally talking about a six-pack or quite a few drinks. So it's a pretty high level. We should consider probably reducing that level. These other countries that have lower levels, the penalty if you get stopped increases at 0.02, 0.04, 0.06. Well, you might consider doing that, but there are a lot of states that were resistant, including Texas, to going to 0.08. The only reason the states are at 0.08 is the federal government said, we will take away your federal highway funding if you do not reduce your level to 0.08. Texas was at 1.0. But at 0.08, the experts will say 100% of people have lost the normal use of their physical and mental faculties. So we could reduce that. That would help. We could get serious. We know that taking away the license does not stop a high percent of people from driving. I have advocated seizing the vehicle. Texas had a law in the books that I can no longer find. I searched diligently last night. It used to say if you had had 2 DWI convictions within the last 5 years and you got stopped for another DWI, if the prosecutor filed an affidavit with a court within 14 days, they could seize your vehicle. Very burdensome law due to the slowness of cases coming into the district attorney's office. A lot of times they didn't even have a case for 14 days. But I went to the district attorney at that time, it was Ronnie Earl, and said, you know, we need a system here where the police, when they arrest someone, they check and they see he has 2 prior convictions that happened recently. They quickly notify your office, you file the affidavit, and I'll have a hearing and I'll take the person's car. We did that one time. That was it. Some guy who had a total of 8 DWIs and had 2 of them recently, somehow they managed to do it. We had a hearing and I said, your car's gone, I have it. Well, I haven't paid for it. That's your problem. That's between you and the bank. So I think we could come up with an effective thing. You're stopped for DWI, you refuse a breath test, you're walking home. Well, you're going to the jail and then you walk home. We're going to keep your car. We'll give you a hearing later. The state will have to prove something like that. And well, you say, well, I borrowed it from a friend. That's too bad. Your friend shouldn't be loaning his car to someone who drinks. The banks may complain. That's one reason it won't ever be implemented. All the lenders are afraid the cars will be seized and they'll lose money. But that would be, if we really wanted to be serious about this thing, we could pretty much solve DWIs overnight. If the legislature, the prosecutors and the judges decided it was a big enough problem, it could be solved. But it's not a big enough problem. We are willing to accept the rate. Let me see, in Texas, I think it's hard to tell. The last couple of years of, you know, with the pandemic and all that have been, I think here it is. DWI cases in Texas in 2020, 83,088. 2021, 89,457. And you know, Travis County, we've had the pandemic and that slowed things. They closed the bars down for a while. Travis County, we had 4,340 DWI cases. And, you know, we have a few thousand, 3,000 or 4,000 killed every year in Texas. But we have decided that we're willing to accept that is acceptable. And the interest, in my cynicism, I say, whoever buys enough legislators gets the laws they want. And that's why we have the current situation. But anyway, I'm happy to, I've probably taken up just about enough time, but anyone have a question, I'm happy to answer it or make up an answer if I don't know it.
Hey, Judge, I got a question, Sam.
Yes.
Hey, Judge, just changing the subject a little bit because I think I've always found it interesting. You are, I ran with you on several occasions. You ran a bunch of marathons. In 50 years, how many marathons have you done in your running? And I imagine exercising and running helps you a lot, but I'm kind of curious. And I've seen you a lot of times out there running. So I'm wondering, how many times have you done your marathons?
Before I'll answer that, I'll tell you why I run. I have sent over 10,000 people to prison, and I would estimate that some of them got executed, but probably 9,900 of them are now out on the street. And for reasons unknown to me, some of them are blaming me for having sent them to prison. They would like nothing better than to get their hands around my necktie and pull it very tightly. So if I slow up, you're going to catch me and you'll never have me as a speaker again, which may be a good thing. So I started running. I'd never run much. Then they had the first Capital 10,000 in 1978. And me and a couple of my friends said, we can do that. We never run that far, but we said, who can't do that? We almost died. I thought I was going to die. I crawled across the finish line, but that's when it started. But marathons, I really have only run 17. Some years ago, I sort of wimped out and went to half marathons. I ran the first 17 3M halves. I've only missed one 3M half marathon in about 40 years. And I ran the 3M half marathon 2 weeks ago, and I have the Austin half marathon this Sunday. I actually signed up for the full one. I wanted to run a full marathon on my 75th year, but then the pandemic arrived and they canceled it. And now that I'm 76, I think I'm too old to run a full marathon. So I'm only going to do half. It sort of irritated me. To run the full marathon, you paid $150. To run the half, you paid like $125. So I contacted them and said, I registered for the full, I want to do the half. And they said, well, that would be another $25. And I said, well, I already gave you 25 more to do the full. You don't have to give it back. And they said, sorry, you're going to have to pay another 25. So I'm now paying $175 to go out and torture myself for a couple of hours. So that's the explanation.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks.
Judge, this is JP. First, let me commend you for hanging in there for 50 years in the judiciary. And my condolences for your comments about the problems with the judiciary that you haven't been successful in resolving in that 50 years. But it's reality. My question is, there is a difference in the judicial system. Some are elected, some are appointed. Could you talk a little bit quickly about the pros and cons of those two concepts?
Well, in Texas, every judge is elected except for the municipal court judges who are appointed by the city council. Now, the federal judges are appointed for life. In the Travis County, the judges have brought in some people to help them out. They call them associate judges, who the judges select. On the criminal side, they're called magistrates, and they're not elected. They just serve at the pleasure. I think I like the modified system. It used to be called the Missouri system, where some body of people gave the governor a selection of 3 or 4 qualified people, and the judge picked one, And then that person became the judge. And after 4 years or 6 years, that person would run for election, a retention election. If the people thought he did a good job, they kept him. If not, they threw him out. I think I mentioned earlier, is this, we've grown as a state. It's impossible for anyone to know who they're voting for. I mean, in Harris County, they got 120 judges. No one knows who they're voting for. So I think some type of modified system, I think, would be preferable. I know this system of electing judges, you people elected me 9 different times. I don't know if that was good or bad. I guess different people have different. The 9,900 people who I sent to prison probably think y'all made a bad choice, but some of the victims are probably happy with it. But I don't know. I think a modified system of appointment plus having some way that the public has an input would help. But I think we may have just too many people here, too many courts, and it's just not working well. But there are a lot of people who have different opinions.
We have 2 more people with their hands up, and then we're going to have to move on with
Sure.
our meeting. Mac, I saw your hand up first.
John, could you comment on why judges are running in as Democrats or Republicans? And I guess a lot of people think, well, why is that even an issue with a judge? I don't know how many states do that, but can you comment on that?
Texas is very, very rare. One of the handful of states where you actually run as a Democrat or Republican. That was one thing I would urge, was to make them nonpartisan to begin with. But in Travis County, for better or worse, every judge is a Democrat. Right now, there is one district judge. In fact, the only Anglo male district judge is a Governor Abbott appointee who got appointed, but as soon as he's up for election, unless he switches parties, he'll get defeated. Or you also have to change genders too. But it's been a real problem, predominantly in Harris and Dallas County. The people vote straight ticket, which I think has been now removed. But whoever was running for governor or president, you'd have these huge wave elections where every person who was a Democrat won or everyone's a Democrat lost. And it went back and forth, and it's very disruptive. Lots of excellent judges who are Republicans also were thrown out, and the same thing happened to Democrats. So it really has not worked well. Yes.
Judge Wisser, I have 2 questions. You were talking about our DWI laws, and how do our laws compare with other states? That's my first question. And then my second one is, you were talking about we have a wide diversity, and you talked about how you would rule in certain situations. And I got the impression that not all judges will rule the same way on the same case. And so how much consistency is there in the ruling on a particular case?
I think it varies tremendously. I was viewed actually as perhaps the most liberal, quote, progressive judge when I was there. I gave out more of these personal bonds than any other district judge. And I believed in shorter sentences administered quicker as opposed to longer sentences administered 2 years later. So I did that, and like some other judges believed in much longer sentences. Some judges never would sign a personal bond releasing people on their own recognizance. But it's strangely enough, I would now, if I were elected, I'd probably be the harshest judge there. I have not changed one bit, but the whole judiciary And I think the Democratic Party has moved way off to the left, and the new prosecutors who were elected are even further to the left than the judges. I mean, I personally believe they've almost run on a decriminalization platform. I mean, one quick example, and I don't want to take it up, shoplifting by homeless people. We have a lot of transient people who are going in and shoplifting. Back in the day, you shoplift, the store security grabbed you, they called the police came, they arrested you, they took you to jail. You spent one night in jail, then you got out. Maybe you might spend a couple of days. Now, shoplifting is a ticketing offense. You go in there, you're homeless, you're transient, you're shoplifting, the security gets you, police officer shows up, he gives you a ticket and says, you're supposed to go to court in 3 weeks, and leaves. How many of the transient homeless people show up in court in 3 weeks, do you think?
None.
It's totally ineffective. And they're doing the same thing on criminal trespass. The downtown hotels are saying, my gosh, the homeless people are coming in here, sleeping in our lobby, and you're coming here giving them tickets. And it's meaningless. And it is, I sit there just shaking my head at this. And we never administered much of a punishment to shoplifters. I always said 90% of the punishment is when that officer comes there, puts the handcuffs on you, puts you in the patrol car, takes you to the jail, you sit in jail overnight, you get out the next day, and you might get probation or you get a day jail sentence, and you already served it. So most of the punishment was that initial shock, and we've done that away. So now for most shoplifting, there's no punishment whatsoever. And all these tickets were given out where people don't show up. And eventually, I had a stack of them, tickets, people didn't show up, issue arrest warrants for them. Well, it's kind of hard to find some of these transient homeless people when I issue a arrest warrant. So we're sending hundreds of arrest warrants to the sheriff's warrant division for homeless and transient people. And I say, it would be so much cheaper just to arrest them in the store, take them there, keep them in jail, maybe keep them in jail 2 or 3 days if they've done this a dozen times before, and then release them. But let's be realistic about what we're doing here. So I think some of this, and then they've said, we're not going to arrest people for small amounts of marijuana. That's okay. Small amounts of cocaine, that may be okay too. But the legislature passes laws, and I don't know that it ought to be the role of the prosecutors to say, well, we will follow this law. We're going to ignore that law. We'll do this law. But again, y'all elected these people, and what can I say?
Judge, this has been very, very interesting. I know we could just talk with you for hours, and I would love to have you back another time just to answer some more questions on a different subject or continue with that one. But we do need to move on, but this has been very, very interesting. Usually I say, if you can hang around for a little bit after we get off, after we finish here for more questions, but we're going to have a board meeting right after this. So I don't think that will work today, but thank you so much. And would you come back again?
Yeah. If you can tolerate me, I'll come back every week, but
No, not every week.
Yeah. You can take the guy out of political office, but it's hard to take the politician out of the guy.
Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. JP, will you tell us about next week's program?
Yes, let me encourage you to be present next week. We have a very interesting and dynamic speaker, a gentleman who's been in about the last 30 years engaged in researching Texana and has done a lot of publications, books. He's a syndicated columnist, mostly in the rural areas of Texas, but he writes very good information. And I think it'd be very intriguing for us to understand more about Texas. His name is Barty Haley. He resides in Conroe, and I think you certainly would enjoy his presentation. Be sure you show up. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. Okay, just want to remind you about some important dates for your calendar. Now, we're having a board meeting right after this. Remember, you can't vote if you're not a board member, but you're certainly welcome to participate in the board meeting. Next Friday is our casino night. March 23rd, we box roses. March 24th, we have rose delivery. April the 2nd is a Lions Camp work day. And then the other thing that I added to the agenda, which wasn't on the agenda that you received, is June the 10th, when we're going to do refreshments at the Lions Camp. So please make sure you have all those important things on your calendar. And if nobody else has anything to report, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and give you about a 5-minute break and see you on the board meeting. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.